So why is it so easy and so often that people who are trying to have a relationship with somebody with borderline personality get so hurt? Why do you get so confused? Many reasons. But what's kind of central at the heart of the confusion? The on and off again relating, the being ghosted, the I need to, quote, take a break, unquote, silence of have I been ghosted or not? Well, it's incongruence in people with borderline personality. And what does incongruence mean? Well, we can only be congruent to self when we have a self, number one, that we know, when we have self-cohesion, self-coherence, so that we know where each of us as a self ends and where others as their own self begin. So this incongruence is driven by the impulsivity at the heart of all of the struggle of people with BPD, and why that is adverse childhood experience. But the point is, so they're very incongruent. They lack object constancy. They lack self-cohesion, coherence. They lack a self until unless significant treatment. So what does all this mean for you? Well, it means that 1 minute they feel one way, and that's all what reality is to them. And the next minute they feel the opposite way. That's incongruence right there. One feeling one second, another feeling the next second, incongruent with each other, not compatible. Why? Because there's no defining self from which all these different feelings, impulses, cognitive distortions rise from, because it's ever changing with the environment in the here and now. When you're in a relationship with somebody with BPD, it's ever changing with the environment that is the internal experience of the person with BPD. First of all, incongruent, impulsive, not logical, highly emotional, easily triggered, the past coming into the here and now dissociatively. That's what they project out into the environment. Projective identification, really, toward the environment. You're in the environment. Therefore, you become that other, the object other parent representation. But in that environment, if you look at this idea of congruence, which is a healthy way to be, or incongruence, which is the way that people with BPD really present in trying to relate, etc., it's mood lability, it's instability, it's lack of self. And with all of this going on, you're being told you're being idealized 1 minute, you're being devalued the next. Maybe that's extreme, but it can happen. So between the idealization and the devaluation is this massive incongruence. Why? Because they have no sense of self. What happens in the emotional arrested development for those who want to be diagnosed with BPD, which is really a response to adverse childhood experience? And I still maintain, and I'm not the only one, it is not a mental illness. That is a false construct. If you want to think of it that way, that's your business. But tell me, how does that help you? How does it help you to get any more clarity in your life to survive the BPD relationship breakup? It won't. So their incongruence is wholly unpredictable to both themselves, lacking self, and to others. So 1 minute they're feeling one thing and they'll say one thing, and then maybe like 20 minutes later they're feeling something different and they'll say the opposite. Or for example, I have a client, many clients have expressed this to me. I don't know if you might relate to this, but the last time they saw the person with BPD that they were dating or in a relationship with, at that moment of sort of a parting of sorts, but not really in terms of whether the relationship was going to go on or not, at least not to the knowledge, maybe not to your knowledge, not to the knowledge of people who are trying to love the person with BPD, which is a gargantuan effort, by the way, that is really going to fail, unfortunately. That's not your failure. It's their inability to take in your love, okay? Their inability to trust, because again, no self. This is really the core issue. And this is not a mental illness, no self. This is a response to adverse childhood experience wherein abandonment occurs in childhood and there are attachment issues, so that people with BPD end up with not even one of the 4 major attachment styles. No, BPD is called disorganized attachment. And disorganized attachment can mean a lot of things, because really what I have to say about that from the inside out is somebody who healed and recovered from BPD, and yes, people are doing that all the time. Maybe not as many people as people would like, right? Or the person in your life with BPD, or who's now your ex. But the thing is, what really happens inside is like that emotional arrested development is a fragmentation, and the child ego state is lost. The self is lost. The good news is there's remnants of that self inside to find, and to go through a long process in healing and recovery, which involves, in a different way than inner child healing for people trying to heal and recover with codependency and from these relationships, it involves also finding that self, the lost self, and an extremely severely wounded inner child that needs to be reparented. But the reparenting for people with BPD needs to take place at the same time as peeling back layers and layers and layers of entrenched defense mechanisms, which is not the same as inner child healing with people with codependency. There might be some defense mechanisms or some defenses, but they're not as pronounced. So, incongruence in borderline personality is what leads so many of you to be really stuck in ruminating, because you're trying to make sense out of something that doesn't make logical sense. And men, to men especially, not to say that women who aren't with men with BPD, or same-sex partners, women with BPD, don't go through just as much as men in many ways, but not in this one way that men tend to feel. And I've had many male clients describe this to me, so I'm not trying to talk for men, that they feel that part of who they are and part of their masculinity and just part of their entire essence as men is about being sort of the protector, or being the protector, being the provider, being the one to rescue or fix, not in that codependent sense, but damsel in distress, man would run over and do something about it type thing. That's a very archaic way to put it. So with this incongruence then, it leaves people after the relationship breakup ruminating about, why did this happen? Why did that happen? How come then they said this, and well, they did this, and so like it's not logical, and you're not going to be able to figure it out. And the more you think about it, the more you're going to ruminate, the more you're going to be focused in the most painful place you possibly could be. And I'm going to say more about rumination in an upcoming video, but it is being stuck with the whys of it all. The asking, the quote, why? Why did he or she do this? For instance, a client asked me recently, the last time I saw this person with BPD, who, is taking a break, and what is the outcome is still to be discovered, I suppose. Did that person with BPD absolutely ghost my client? Many clients I have. Or is there ultimately going to be recontact? Is that the healthy thing for these clients to do, or people to do, or not? Each person has to decide how they're going to work through this process. So the question I got asked recently was, but the last time I saw her, so she's been off taking a break for, 2 or 3 months, and undetermined what's going to happen next. Did she ghost? Is she coming back? What, all that. So the question was, how come last time when I saw her and when we hugged, she held on so tight for a minute or a couple minutes? She hung on so tight. That really is an example of incongruence. Why? Because, and the client said, and then went on to take this break, and we've had no contact for however long. So in that moment, it's likely that the person with BPD felt really close in a way that they could barely tolerate, grabbed on in a hug really tight, holding on for that moment, if you will, or those minutes. And then after that is going to experience a total shift. from that as much closeness as they can take, usually, but a tight hug, for example, to so that temporary, almost congruent reality of I'm hugging this person, and what does that mean for the person with BPD? Might not mean the same thing that it means for the person getting hugged, right? For you, for the non-borderline, you're like, I love this person, we're close, this is a tight hug, this is great. For the person with BPD, it might be the total incongruence of holding on, confusing love with need again, needing to hold on, as they're also maybe or maybe not exactly aware that they're about to do a 360, because that closeness in and of itself and other things probably already that came up for them, many triggers, are going to then, and would in this client's case, lead that person to do the I'm taking a break, am I coming back where you ghosted, who knows, right? So this incongruence is driven by lack of self in BPD, by the very nature of the impulsivity of how people are with BPD are just following emotion after emotion after emotion. So in approach avoidance conflict, fear of abandonment, fear of engulfment, back and forth, idealizing, devaluing, maybe not idealizing anymore, but bringing you sort of up a little bit and devaluing you again. This is all their incongruent presentation because they lack self-cohesion and self-coherence. So what's the main point in this? That nothing that happens in the way that these relationships end so mysteriously, so painfully, so suddenly, so unannounced often, and always, almost always, with rare exception, with no closure, it's not your fault. And what you need to do is try to stop finding 10,000 thoughts to hang yourself up on, this kind of hook of, but why did he or she say this? But why did he or she do that? And of course they're going to be blaming and shifting everything to everybody else because they don't have anywhere to put it. And that's just an explanation, not an excuse for it. So incongruence in borderline personality is at the heart of the loss of self, what that truly means and why that is, and all that you've seen different things from them, right? But in the cognitive dissonance of it all, you're holding on maybe still more to the positive in your intellect, and your emotions you're feeling something totally different than what you're thinking. But the thinking becomes ruminating when you try to make sense out of the incongruence and the impulsivity and the approach avoidance conflict in people with BPD, and it isn't logical to begin with. It is the lack of a self, which most of you, I'm sure, whether you have codependency or not, you're non-borderline, you can't imagine what that means, what that feels like. I've been there, done that, got through that, healed that. So it's really important for you to know that all the ruminating and all the asking of the question, why did he or she do or say this? Or didn't, and if I would have done or said this, or if I'd have handled it differently. I know people have to go through some of this, but you are increasing your suffering every time you go down that path in your mind. And what to do about it? Well, I'm going to have another video coming on that. I'm going to have another announcement about a website, what's going to be happening on a website of mine coming, and what that's going to provide you, and a whole lot more information on this. And of course, I'm out here to work with you if you really want to get into the healing and recovery process of all this, because you need to stop the ruminating. You need to stop following the question why that is largely answered simply by borderline personality, the incongruence, which is probably not a word used as much today, of it all. And why that is because of the lack of self and what that really means. And the person that idealized you in the beginning was but a fragment of who this person could be if they would truly get treatment and go through the whole process and heal and recover from borderline personality. So I hope that was somewhat helpful. Next video coming, or a couple and or a live stream, is going to be more about ruminating and how to stop that, some suggestions, And again, I'm out here to work with you if you resonate with me, to help you in a more deep way to actually stop the ruminating and actually get through the steps and stages of that to what it is that you are unconsciously avoiding right now by keeping yourself in this ruminating place of trying to make sense out of what doesn't make sense and not yet accepting what's really happened. So I hope that was helpful, and take care.